The rain in Seattle did what it always did, made the city look newly washed and slightly haunted. From the 8th floor apartment, the sound of it was a soft drum over the window ledge, a domestic metronome that had timed Evan Mercer's evenings for the better part of 7 years. He watched the taillights below smear into red calligraphy along Denny Way and told himself, again, that late nights were the price of ambition. This was America. Everyone owed themselves to their calendars. On the counter, Natalie's coffee mug sat exactly where she left it at 6:45 a.m., a lipstick crescent drying like a fossil. Her text at 5:58 p.m. had been the same as the last dozen Thursdays. Depositions went long, don't wait up. He had thumbed back a thumbs up, then deleted it, suddenly aware how cheap the gesture looked. Instead, he typed, "Got it. Be safe." He stared at the little gray bubble, as if decency could be proof. They had married into a ritualized busyness. Evan, 34, managed 3 squads at a fintech building fraud tools. His days were on Slack, in Jira, at whiteboards that smelled faintly of solvent and dry erase. Natalie, 32, was a rising litigation associate at Hayes & Barlow. Evan had always loved watching her step into a room, spine straight, voice precise, eyes that made juries feel as if she were letting them in on the secret math of fairness. They fit each other like adjacent lanes on I-5 parallel, a swift, close enough to nod at, rarely crossing. He reached for his phone, then put it down, then reached again. The small things had become loud. A Lyft receipt last Thursday pinged his inbox a ride from a Capitol Hill corner at 6:12 p.m., when she had texted him at 11:23 p.m. that she was still at the office. It could have been a client dinner, he had told himself, a transfer to a second location, any number of innocent if exhausting legal realities. Then he'd noticed the keycard. Evan handled access logs for audits at his company often enough to know their vocabulary. 2 weeks ago, when Natalie asked him to pick up her fallen badge from the floorboard of his car, he turned it over, saw the micro scratches around the reader chip, that familiar patina of daily swipes. Tonight, on the shelf by the door, her badge looked oddly pristine, as if it lived more in the idea of late nights than in the machines that recorded them. He was not a man given to melodrama. His father had been a school counselor who taught him phrases like, "Name the feeling," and "What's the need under the feeling?" And Evan had internalized that language until it felt like furniture helpful, quiet, unremarked. But there was a particular species of dread no vocabulary held. It wasn't rage. It was a small, exact animal, curled beneath the sternum, humming. The rain thickened. He put on water for pasta and theatrically took it off the stove. Hunger felt impolite around suspicion. He found his way to the couch and opened the laptop he did not want to open. He did not check her texts, did not pry into her Instagram DMs, did not touch the folders in the cloud where their tax returns lived with an intimacy their faces lately did not. Instead, he opened the email thread she'd shared months ago when syncing calendars, the one that forwarded him the building's ribbon of security alerts. Maintenance after hours Friday. Elevator 2 down until 10 a.m. Mask policy update. He scrolled, found the contact. Security desk, Hayes & Barlow, 12th Avenue. He typed, "Hi, this is Evan Mercer, Natalie Reed's spouse. We're having a building issue with her badge not registering. Do you mind confirming it's been working for after-hours exits? She's worried she might have to replace it." He read the message 3 times for tone and plausible innocence before sending. Rain 8 minutes. The reply came from a general inbox, cheerful, prompt. "Hi, Evan. Looks like Natalie's badge is active and working fine. For after-hours exits, our system doesn't record activity for her past 6 p.m. in the last 3 months. If she's having issues, she might be using the side lobby. Let us know, and we can check that reader too." Evan closed the laptop with an attention that was almost ceremonial. There were 100 explanations. Maybe the firm had moved evening work to a different building. Maybe the logs were wrong. Systems were always wrong until they were catastrophically right. Maybe she had lied about working late because the truth was simple and painful. She needed a room that wasn't theirs, a breath that wasn't shared. He had ghosted her needs, he thought suddenly. There were nights he had asked Reddit strangers about moral distress over layoffs rather than asking his wife how closing arguments felt in her throat. He took out his phone and wrote the one message with the precision of a wiretap. Security just confirmed your keycard hasn't logged any exits after 6 p.m. for 3 months. Are you okay? He added no emoji, no hedge. He did not accuse. He tried to make the message do what he wished he could do, name the fact, and hold the person. The rain turned from percussion to hiss. For a long moment, the phone lay inert, a stone with a screen. Evan's hand shook, an old soccer injury flaring, as if memory itself had ligaments. He stood, walked to the window, told himself not to watch the device. Behind him, it buzzed and kept buzzing. First a text, "Can I call?" Then the call, Natalie's name a clean white capital against the dark. He answered. Silence opened like a wound. When Natalie spoke, her voice had lost its geometry. "I'm parked outside the firm," she said, and then, as if every muscle had given up the pretense of posture, "Evan, I'm so sorry." The words worked like smelling salts and like a blow. He sat without meaning to. "Are you safe?" he asked. It was the only sentence he could make without either lying or breaking. "I'm safe," she said. "I'm not at the office. She exhaled. Rain yelled against whatever roof she sat under. "I lied about the late nights." He did not speak. The animal under his sternum uncurled and bared its small, unremarkable teeth. "There's more," she said. "I want to tell you in person. Can I come home now?" He thought of their entryway, of the row of shoes that testified to the life they had made. Her heels like architecture, his sneakers that knew the path to the trash chute in the dark. He thought of the double sink, the one bathroom drawer that would not close because it contained life as it was actually lived expired sunscreen, a Band-Aid peeling inside its paper, an engagement ring cleaner kit they had used once after a hike when the diamond picked up dust like a story. "Come home," he said. His voice sounded like someone else's patience. "I'll be there in 20, she said. "Evan." The word fell, shivered, and then she hung up. He set the phone beside the fossil of lipstick and stood in the kitchen, leaning on the counter, like witnesses lean on the witness stand when the wood becomes the only thing between the body and collapse. The apartment hummed with the appliances' stupid certainty. In the adjoining room, their ficus plant slouched, never quite getting enough winter light. On the fridge was a postcard from a wedding in Taos they had attended 4 summers ago. Natalie in a linen dress, Evan burnt pink across the nose, both of them grinning like people who thought time was a form of compounding interest you could count on. He rinsed the mug, then stopped midway and set it back down unclean, as if washing it might erase evidence of the morning they still had. He opened the bedroom window a crack to make the rain a little louder, not to drown anything out, but to match the sound inside his ribs. Down on the street, a car door slammed. Somewhere, a siren tested itself and decided against it. Evan checked the deadbolt without knowing why. When he returned to the window, he caught his own reflection layered over the city. A man in a t-shirt, eyes ringed, holding posture like it was a deed. Behind his reflection, he could see the curve of headlights turning into their garage, the key in the lock, the pause, then the turning. He thought, wildly, of the message he had sent and of everything it had made possible and impossible all at once. Truth had a way of arriving like weather, inevitable. inarguable, indifferent to plans. The door opened. "Evan," Natalie said, stepping into the soft drum of rain. He was surprised by his first sensation. Not rage, not relief, but the smallest movement of wind, something clearing. "Hi," he said, and for a few seconds more, they did not move. Natalie took off her trench coat as if it were evidence. The fabric exhaled rain. A darker halo spread on the entryway rug. She did not step out of her heels, which made her look taller than either of them felt. Evan saw at once the fatigue that had been living under her makeup the way a watermark lives in paper. She fastened the coat onto the hook and stood with her hands at her sides, palms open, a posture that read like surrender, if you knew how to read it. "Do you want water?" Evan asked. It was an old choreography, this reaching for neutral mercies. She shook her head. "I want to tell you the truth before I start trying to make it sound better." They took their seats at the dining table that doubled as everything workstation, weekend crossword nest, tax season battlefield. The ficus leaned toward them like someone craning for gossip. A streetcar worked its bell down the block. The city kept doing what cities do, proving that private crises are not generalizable. Natalie's fingers found the seam of the table and worried it. "It started as, not late nights, but later nights," she said. "Client dinners, postmortems with partners. I was good at that room being read as a safe presence, a brain they could borrow without crediting. That's its own drug." The firm brought in Julian Hayes to fix the appellate team's numbers. "I know who he is," Evan said. He didn't mean to cut her. The sentence cut anyway. He had seen Julian twice. At firm holiday parties, where the floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the downtown skyline, back at itself like a brag. He remembered the practiced ease with which Julian shook hands, the way people turned their bodies toward him before he even spoke. Natalie nodded. "I thought it would be mentorship. That's what everyone called it. He would flag my memos and tell me they were clean, and then he'd ask how I was sleeping. He remembered my mother's name after I said it once." The smallness of the detail shamed her. "He told me that I had the kind of voice juries would trust. I kept saying thank you like it was an oath." She described the incremental slope. An Uber shared after a panel because the rain was biblical. A dinner rescheduled to the bar because the client canceled and the bottle was already open. A joke about being work-married that died in the air and then didn't die. She described the peculiar weather of being seen too much and not enough, how praise and invisibility could coexist, how she learned to take oxygen from a leak. "I told myself I was networking," she said. "That's the American word we use, so we don't have to say hunger." Evan watched her mouth as if accuracy were visible there. The part of him that needed chronology started placing pushpins into a private map. This message, that lift receipt, the week he'd slept on the couch because of a back spasm and she hadn't asked to share the inconvenience. He heard his father's old questions shuffle to the front of his mind, gentle as file folders. Name the feeling. What is the unmet need? Under his sternum, the animal paced. "How long?" he asked, and the question came out sanded, almost kind. 3 months, she said. "A little more if you count the flirting we pretended wasn't." The first time it crossed a line, I told myself it was an accident engineered by proximity. The second time proved the first was a decision. She did not cry. The absence of tears felt more honest than any performance would have. The story she built paid debts in full. Where, when, what they said, what they didn't say. She told him about a hotel that had the good grace to be anonymous, about the way guilt reorganized her body so that it felt like a house with doors that didn't open to the same rooms anymore. She told him about Julian's wedding band left in a dop kit like a superstition, and about her own ring biting the base of her finger because she could not bear to take it off, and could not bear that it stayed on. "I lied because I was ashamed," she said, and because the shame didn't stop me. She let the sentence sit with them until the rain softened. Evan felt time elongate and then fold. He could see the past quarter orbiting the present like a small, predictable moon. He tried to notice everything to make a record he could later trust when revision began. Natalie's voice was hoarse at the edges. Her left earlobe was bare. The right still held a gold stud. In the sink sat the fossilized mug with its lipstick crescent, unchanged and suddenly violent with meaning. He thought wildly of the first apartment they shared, where the most complicated thing they had done was learn the dishwasher's moods. "What happens now, Sa?" he asked, because sometimes naming the abyss is safer than staring into it. She took a breath that sounded like memory breaking into smaller pieces. "I ended it today," she said, "before your message, or because I knew I couldn't hold all the lies anymore, and your message made that knowledge unavoidable. I told him I needed my life back. He didn't like the word no. He thinks I'm catastrophizing. He thinks nobody needs to know. He framed it as a mature adult arrangement. A flicker of contempt not for Evan, not even for herself, but for the script lit and went out. I'll tell the firm." She swallowed. "I'll tell HR. I will not put you in the position of finding out from a leak." Evan felt a dull, unwelcome gratitude for the administrative shape that consequence could take. Policies, emails, a language more precise than their private vocabulary allowed. "And us?" he asked. The question did not attempt to be brave. "I want to be accountable," she said. "I will answer anything you ask. I will agree to no contact with him. I will give you my phone." Her hand moved toward it, then halted. "No, that sounds like surveillance, and I don't want to rebuild us on a policing model I would never defend at trial. I will tell you passwords, calendars, whatever makes the ground less tilted. But I want you to have dignity. I want that for myself, too." He surprised himself by nodding. Dignity had the right temperature. He didn't want to become a man who scrolled for proof at 3 a.m., who turned love into an audit. He also didn't want to be a man who mistook forbearance for moral superiority. The space between those two dangers was a narrow footbridge. "We sleep apart for now," he heard himself say. "Just so our bodies aren't making promises our minds haven't decided to keep." "Okay," she said immediately, visible relief loosening the line of her jaw. "I'll take the couch." It was the wrong offer, they both knew it, but it was sincere. "I'll start therapy. A real one, not the wellness app the firm sends discount codes for. You can come when you want, or not." He thought of the way he had outsourced difficult feelings to strangers on the internet, letting anonymous empathy smooth him where he should have been rough with himself. Micro-betrayals, the therapist in his head murmured. He had not cheated. He had, however, left unwatered things that could not live without daily rain. "We'll find someone good," he said. "Not because a therapist fixes anything, but because I don't think we can hold this weight alone without turning into caricatures of ourselves." They were quiet, long enough for the refrigerator to kick on. Natalie rubbed the bare earlobe and noticed it, grimaced. "I lost the other stud getting out of the car. Isn't that stupid? Of all the things to notice." "It's a detail," he said. "Details are what keep us from turning this into a movie we already know the end of." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I hate that you can still make sense when I've been so senseless." "You're not a thesis," he said, and the line startled them both, too tender, too soon, but truer than silence. From his chair he could see the edge of the hallway that led to the bedroom. He could feel the negative space in there, the outline of a body that would not join his. He imagined sleep as a foreign country that issued visas reluctantly. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll schedule HR. I'll write a statement that doesn't turn me into a victim or a monster. I'll tell Monica, her mentor, because she'll hear it from someone else if I don't. And I'll send Julian a no-contact message that you can read, not to ask permission, but to be witnessed. Evan nodded again. Witness was another word that felt right in his mouth tonight. I'm going to take a shower, she said, not to wash anything off, just so I don't smell like rain when I try to sleep on your couch. It's our couch, he said, and heard the pronoun like a negotiation. When she rose, the room felt taller for a moment, then thinner. Evan stayed at the table with the hum of the appliances and the rain and the secret he no longer had to pretend wasn't there. He looked at the coffee mug with its fossil and left it untouched. A museum label he couldn't yet write in the bathroom. The pipes clanged, then steadied. Steam began to ghost the hallway mirror. He pulled a blanket from the bedroom and placed it carefully on the couch, the one with the sag, in the glamorous corner they always avoided. He folded a towel for her hair, as if hospitality could make a shape where trust had broken. He powered off his phone not as a gesture of moral purity, but because he understood the tyranny of the ping. If there were to be explosions online tomorrow, he did not need to train for them tonight. Natalie came back in a t-shirt and soft shorts he recognized from vacations when they had been better at being versions of themselves. Her hair was wet and clean and smelled like the ordinary. She paused, seeing the prepared couch, and put a hand to her mouth not to cry, but to keep the gratitude from spilling in a way that would make it about relief rather than cost. "Good night, Evan," she said. "Good night, Nat." He went to the bedroom and left the door ajar, not as an invitation and not as a defense, but as an accurate map of where the door currently was. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor laughed too loudly at something that would be ordinary again in the morning. The city, indifferent and tender, let the rain thrum. In the dark, Evan lay on his side facing the door, awake to the new geometry of their home. He could almost hear the animal under his sternum settling down, not sleeping, but curling against a warmth that might, if handled correctly, become something like patience. The morning came with too much light. Seattle, in its perverse generosity, decided to stop raining, and the sun carved bright bars through the blinds, catching in the steam of the coffee machine. Evan stood in the kitchen, measuring beans by muscle memory. He hadn't slept more than an hour, but his movements were quiet, deliberate, the ritual of a man pretending control. Natalie emerged from the couch, her hair a halo of disheveled curls. The gray blanket he'd folded now clung to her shoulders like a truce flag. For a moment, the image felt domestic again, like some scene of quiet intimacy, but between them stretched the invisible debris of a building that had already collapsed. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some," she said. Her voice carried the flatness of someone saving energy for the damage still to come. "I drafted the message to HR. I'll send it once I get to the office." He nodded, poured her coffee, and passed it across the counter. Their fingers didn't touch. She opened her phone. He watched her expression sharpen, the professional mask sliding back into place, the lawyer who could endure any questioning. "I'll have to tell Monica before I send it," she murmured. "She deserves to hear it from me." "Do you trust her?" "I used to," she said simply, "but I don't trust silence anymore." At Hayes and Barlow, the hum of normalcy felt obscene. Natalie walked past cubicles where laughter sounded too easy, too ignorant. Every step was a choreography of restraint. She could feel her colleagues' glances, those tiny, sharp half-second scans that sensed disruption before words did. She reached her office and closed the door. The email was waiting. Subject line, "Request for Ethics Committee Review." She reread it 3 times before pressing send. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat on the sentence that ended her career's upward line. "I wish to self-report a violation of the firm's fraternization policy involving a senior partner, Julian Hayes." Her phone vibrated within minutes. Julian. She didn't answer. Then came a text. Julian. We can still fix this. HR doesn't need to know. Julian. Second text. You're burning us both. Think carefully. She muted the thread and turned her phone face down. The office light overhead flickered once, too perfectly timed, like the universe's sense of humor. Monica appeared at her door, eyes narrowed. Is it true? Natalie didn't lie. Yes. Monica sighed the way people do when they realize their empathy has limits. I warned you, Natalie. Julian's been through 3 protégés. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But you're the first to put it in writing. That's exactly why I did, Natalie said. Because none of us should have had to. For a moment, silence pressed between them like a third person. Then Monica's tone softened. HR's already scheduling. I'll sit in if you want someone neutral in the room. I'd appreciate that. When Monica left, Natalie closed her eyes and let the sound of her own breath fill the office. Every inhale tasted like disinfectant and fluorescent heat. She thought of Evan, of the message that had broken everything with surgical precision. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. And clarity was harder to survive than hatred. At home, Evan sat on the couch she'd just vacated hours ago. His phone buzzed with a different kind of intrusion. Coworkers, oblivious, asking about code reviews, deadlines, lunch plans. He answered mechanically, each emoji feeling like a small betrayal of what his life had become. Then came a notification linked in. Someone had liked Natalie's recent firm post, proud to stand for integrity in legal practice. The irony was too exquisite to bear. He closed the app, opened Reddit, and almost typed a confession under a thread titled, Has anyone ever stayed after being cheated on? But he stopped. He realized he didn't want anonymous empathy this time. He wanted the hard, unpoetic silence of reality. By noon, his phone lit again. Natalie. Meeting scheduled. 2 p.m. Ethics Committee. He typed back, Do you want me there? A long pause. Then, No. But stay near your phone. At 1:57 p.m., Natalie stood before a polished oak door etched with gold letters. Ethics Review Panel. Confidential. Inside, the air was refrigerated, dry, and bureaucratically moral. Monica sat to one side, Julian to the other, jaw set, a practiced martyrdom in his eyes. Ms. Reed, began the HR representative. Do you confirm that the relationship was consensual? Yes, Natalie said. Do you allege coercion? No. Only that consent doesn't erase the imbalance of power that made it possible. Julian's lips curved, half smirk, half sermon. We're both adults. It's being exaggerated because she regrets it. The committee chair raised an eyebrow. Mr. Hayes, please refrain from commentary. Natalie's throat felt raw, but her voice stayed steady. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking consequence. Outside the room, Evan waited in a cafe across the street, hands wrapped around a paper cup that had gone cold long ago. He could see the mirrored glass of the firm's windows, could imagine her in there beneath the bright light of procedure. A notification popped up, a text from an unknown number. You don't know me, but you deserve to. My name's Rebecca Hayes. His stomach turned. Julian's wife. Another message followed before he could reply. I found your wife's number in his iCloud backup. I thought you should know you're not the only one he lied to. Do you want to talk? Evan stared at the screen, the absurd politeness of the question cracking something open. He typed, then deleted, then typed again. Not yet. Maybe later. By evening, Natalie came home hollow-eyed, clutching a folder of non-disclosure agreements and exit options. The firm had offered her administrative leave pending further evaluation. In corporate English, that meant exile. Evan waited by the window. How bad? They'll announce internal review tomorrow. Julian's trying to spin it as a misunderstanding, but it's done. She looked at him, her voice thinning to a whisper. I'm done. He walked to her slowly, not to comfort, but to stand near enough that honesty had a face again. No, he said quietly, you're not done. You're finally starting to tell the truth. For the first time in weeks, she let herself weep, not performatively, not for forgiveness, but for release. Evan didn't touch her, didn't move. He let the sound fill the apartment like a necessary storm. Outside, the rain had begun again, soft and relentless. When the sobs quieted, Natalie looked up. You should hate me. I do, he said, but not more than I still see you. That sentence hung between them, alive and trembling. It was not forgiveness. It was the scaffolding before forgiveness, fragile but real. She nodded, eyes shining through exhaustion. Then maybe there's something left to rebuild. And in that thin hour between ruin and repair, they both realized love, like the city's rain, never really stopped. It just changed the kind of silence it fell into. Evan woke before dawn. The city outside was still half asleep, caught between the last streetlight flickers and the pale blue hint of morning. He sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, listening to the slow hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sigh from the couch where Natalie had fallen asleep fully dressed. The air between them was no longer sharp. It was something duller, quieter, like a bruise that had started to settle beneath the skin. He walked to the kitchen and brewed coffee, more out of habit than need. The mug he handed her wasn't an olive branch. It was a morning, the first they had survived after everything broke open. Natalie took it carefully, as though heat and forgiveness were indistinguishable. I talked to HR again, she said, voice hoarse. They're offering me a leave with pay. The condition is that I stay off all client contact until they finish their review. Evan nodded. That's humane, I guess. It's damage control, she corrected gently, but I'll take it. I think I need quiet. She looked at him, then properly looked, and the silence between them turned into something alive. You haven't asked me why, she said. Not really. You asked what happened, not why. He let the words land, heavy but not hostile. Because I already know part of the answer, he said, and because I'm afraid the rest will sound too familiar. Her brows furrowed. Familiar how? He looked out the window, at the cranes along the waterfront, their necks like skeletons of progress. Because we both got addicted to being seen by people who weren't each other. You had Julian, I had the internet. She blinked. What do you mean? He hesitated, then spoke slowly. You know that subreddit I used to scroll every night? The one for founders burning out? There was someone there, not a woman I met, just someone I talked to. Someone who asked about my insomnia, my doubts, my imposter syndrome. I never said I was married. I never said I wasn't. Her breath caught not in anger, but in recognition. So you did have someone, she whispered. Not in the way you think, he said. It wasn't sex, it wasn't romance, but it was attention. Intimacy without accountability. I was outsourcing my feelings. I was giving pieces of myself to someone who didn't have to see the rest of me. It felt easier than watching us fade. Natalie looked down at her coffee. Micro-betrayals, she murmured. Our therapist used that term when she was describing emotional drift. I never thought it applied to us. It did, he said quietly. We were perfect in public, but in private, we stopped reaching for each other. The words hung in the air, not as blame, but as anatomy, the kind of truth that doesn't accuse, only reveals. Later that morning, they sat across from each other in the therapist's office. Dr. Simone Wallace was a black woman in her 50s with silver-rimmed glasses and a voice that could calm riots. The office was small, lined with art prints, and one impossibly healthy fiddle leaf fig. "So," Dr. Wallace began, glancing at her notepad, "you're not here to decide whether to stay or leave. You're here to understand what you built, what broke it, and whether what's left can hold weight again. That sound about right?" They both nodded. Dr. Wallace turned to Natalie first. "Tell me the hardest part of the last week." Natalie's fingers tightened on the armrest. "Facing the version of me that existed in Julian's eyes. I didn't realize how much I wanted to be admired. It wasn't even about love. It was about being seen as exceptional. I told myself I was different from women who fell for power, but I wasn't." Dr. Wallace didn't flinch. "And the easiest part?" "Confessing," she said after a pause. "Once I said it, the pretending stopped. There's relief in honesty, even when it ruins you." Dr. Wallace nodded and turned to Evan. "And you?" Evan exhaled. "The hardest part is that I don't feel entirely wronged, which makes the anger confusing. I see my fingerprints on this too. Every late night I dismissed her exhaustion. Every joke I made about big, firm cult life. I was a good husband on paper, but I stopped showing curiosity. I didn't notice her hunger because I'd learned to be comfortable with quiet marriages." The therapist smiled, small and knowing. "That's not guilt speaking. That's awareness. Betrayal doesn't always start with lies, it starts with neglect." They sat in silence, both absorbing the sentence. The city noise leaked through the half-open window, the echo of construction, a siren far away, life continuing. "Here's what I want from you two this week," Dr. Wallace said. "A list, not of grievances or apologies, a list of griefs. Everything you've both lost because of what happened. The person you thought you were. The way you used to laugh. The simple act of walking into a room without thinking who might be watching. Write them all down. Grief must be seen before it can be buried." Evan nodded slowly. Natalie's lips trembled into the ghost of a smile. "A eulogy for us," she said. "Not quite," the therapist replied. "More like an autopsy. You need to know which parts died before you decide what can live." That night, they wrote in separate notebooks. Natalie sat at the kitchen counter, Evan at the window seat that overlooked the sound. The apartment smelled of quiet, of brewed tea, of pencil graphite, of something fragile being named. "I've lost the version of myself who thought morality was absolute," Natalie wrote. "I've lost my ambition's innocence. I've lost the ease of reaching for his hand without wondering if it's still mine." Across the room, Evan wrote, "I've lost the safety of certainty. I've lost the illusion that loyalty equals love. I've lost the right to see myself as the injured one without question." When they looked up, their eyes met. Neither spoke. The notebooks between them felt like confessionals without priests. Natalie broke the silence first. "Dr. Wallace said grief is a form of love with nowhere to go. Then maybe this is where it goes," he said. She closed her notebook and nodded. "Maybe." Outside, the rain had stopped again, but the windows still glistened with its memory. Evan walked to the sink, rinsed 2 mugs, and left one drying upside down beside hers parallel, like twin survivors. He turned back toward her. "Tomorrow," he said, "let's drive somewhere without phones, just for the day." "Anywhere in mind?" "Someplace quiet," he said. "We can decide silence on purpose this time." For the first time in a long time, she smiled, not as a plea, but as recognition. "Okay." And as they stood there, the air between them, though fragile, no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like soil after rain, wrecked, but ready for something to grow. The drive out of Seattle took them past the industrial edges of the city, past cranes frozen mid-lift, past murals peeling under rain, past the gray sprawl that bled into green. They drove without music. Natalie's hands rested loosely on her lap, Evan's fingers steady on the wheel. The car smelled faintly of coffee and rain-wet asphalt, that particular Pacific Northwest perfume of surrender and endurance. They didn't talk until they reached the ferry dock at Edmonds. The Sound stretched wide and metallic before them. The sky hung low, bruised with an almost cinematic melancholy. Natalie turned her face to the wind. "This feels like the kind of day you'd write about and think you invented," she said. Evan smiled without humor. "Except we didn't. We're just in someone else's weather." They boarded the ferry, walked to the deck, and leaned against the cold railing. Around them, families took photos. Children clutched seagull-shaped souvenirs. Couples shared earbuds. The ordinariness of it all made their private disaster feel both smaller and sharper. "You know," Natalie said after a while, "the HR statement's been leaked." Evan turned. "What?" She handed him her phone. There it was. An anonymous post on a legal gossip forum blurred names, but clear enough for anyone who knew. A female associate at Hayes & Barlow self-reported an affair with a senior partner. Ethics committee in review. Comments bloomed below like rot. Classic career suicide. She probably wanted attention. Feminism gone too far. Evan scrolled, jaw tightening. Jesus. "I told myself I could live with consequences," she said quietly. "But this is something else. They've turned my confession into entertainment." He handed the phone back. "You knew it might happen." "I did, but knowing doesn't prepare you for watching people rewrite your story in real time." The ferry horn cut through the air. She flinched. Evan wanted to say something like "it'll pass," but he knew that was a lie the internet never forgets. It only scrolls away. They rode in silence until the other shore appeared. When the ferry docked, Evan drove inland through a corridor of trees. The road narrowed, turned gravel. He parked by a lookout point overlooking the Sound, the water glinting pewter beneath the moving clouds. "Remember when we used to come here?" she asked. "Yeah, our first year. You brought a bottle of wine in your tote and forgot the corkscrew. I tried to open it with a house key." "And broke it," she said, smiling faintly. "We had to sleep with the door unlocked that night." He nodded. "We were reckless in good ways then." "Now we're just reckless in slow motion," she said. They sat on a bench facing the water. The wind tugged at her hair. He reached out instinctively to smooth a strand away from her face, but stopped midway. She saw the hesitation, and for a second, the ghost of tenderness crossed her eyes. "I saw Julian this morning," she said. Evan stiffened. "Where?" "In the garage. He was waiting by my car, said he wanted to talk." "What did you do?" "I walked past him, got in and locked the door. He knocked on the window, said I didn't have to make this a scandal, that he could protect me if I played it smart." Evan's hands clenched. "Protect you? Jesus, he's unbelievable. He thinks it's still about power, that he can negotiate my integrity like a settlement." She looked out at the water. "But the thing about confessing is, you lose the leverage of secrecy. There's nothing left to threaten me with." Evan exhaled. "He'll protect himself, though. He'll rewrite the narrative until you're the liability." "I know, HR said they might call me again if it escalates." He studied her profile, the calm, the exhaustion, the dignity she was stitching back together piece by piece. "Do you regret telling the truth?" Her answer came slow. "No, but I regret how long I waited. Every day I stayed silent, I built him a longer runway." They sat until the sky thickened into twilight, until the Sound turned the color of steel. Then Evan's phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca Hayes. "He's blaming her publicly. My husband. He's telling people she was obsessed, unstable. Thought you'd want to know." Evan's pulse thudded in his temples. He showed Natalie the message. Her face didn't change. "Of course he is,"
she murmured. "He's done this before." He stood abruptly. "You should sue him." "I might," she said, "but not today. Today I'm just trying to breathe without defending myself." She rose too, walked to the railing. The water below was endless, gray, swallowing gray. "You know what's strange?" she said. "Even after everything, part of me still feels sorry for him. He's trapped in his own mythology, brilliant man, misunderstood by lesser mortals. He'll never know what freedom feels like." Evan joined her, the wind cutting through his jacket. "You sound stronger than you did a week ago." "I'm not stronger," she said. "I'm just done being afraid of being seen." She turned to him then, and for the first time, he saw her without the armor of shame or apology. There was something raw and steady in her expression, something that made him realize this wasn't a recovery arc, it was a rebirth. "I don't know if I can love you the same way again," she said softly, "but I want to learn how to love honestly this time, even if it's not with you." The sentence was a scalpel clean, precise, fatal to illusions, but not to hope. Evan nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can either, but I want to see who we are without the lies." The ferry in the distance blew its horn again, echoing across the water like a benediction or a warning. They stood there side by side, not touching, not needing to. Behind them, the world was already rewriting their story, but in that suspended, salt-heavy air, they owned it again, two imperfect witnesses to their own undoing, trying to build a language that could hold both love and accountability. When they finally turned back toward the car, the headlights swept across the trees, revealing paths half lit, half shadowed. The drive home was quiet, but not empty. The silence no longer hurt. It breathed. They didn't talk much on the drive back to Seattle. The car cut through darkness like a quiet agreement. No decisions tonight. The air smelled of salt and damp pine. Natalie leaned her head against the window, eyes half open, watching the highway lights streak by like ghosts of other lives, versions of them who hadn't fallen apart, who still texted each other memes instead of apologies. When they reached the apartment, it was late. The street was glazed with rain again, the city's way of resetting the evidence. Natalie walked in first, turned on the soft kitchen light, and for the first time since her confession, she didn't look like she was entering a courtroom. "Do you want tea?" she asked. "Sure," Evan said. His voice was steady, but his heartbeat wasn't. She filled the kettle, the whistle low and private between them. When she set the mugs on the table, they both sat down as if attending a hearing that didn't require lawyers this time, just courage. "I've been thinking," she began, "about what Dr. Wallace said, how rebuilding isn't forgiveness, it's construction. She told me to define what staying would look like, not in emotion, but in logistics. So I wrote some things down." She slid a folded sheet of paper toward him. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate lawyer's script. He unfolded it and read silently. Boundaries. 1. No contact with Julian. No exceptions. 2. Weekly therapy together and separate. 3. Transparency about communication, but no surveillance. 4. Temporary financial independence. Separate accounts for 6 months. 5. Living in the same apartment, but separate rooms. 6. Reassessment in 3 months. Stay, separate, or redefine. At the bottom, a single line. Neither of us owes the other redemption, only truth. Evan folded the paper, exhaled slowly. "You sound like you're drafting a peace treaty." "I am," she said. "We've been at war with silence for years." He looked at her, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the quiet steadiness that had replaced her former fire. "Do you want to stay?" "I want to see if honesty can survive love," she said, "but I can't promise the old version of us will come back." He nodded. "I don't want it back. That version was polite, not alive."
Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something almost like relief. "Then maybe we have a chance," she whispered. They both sipped tea. The steam rose between them like the shape of something still forming. The next day, Evan sent an email to Dr. Wallace. "We'd like to continue. Weekly sessions. We're drafting our own contract." The reply came within an hour. "Good. Clarity is the first mercy after betrayal." At work, Evan was slower than usual. Slack pings blurred into white noise. He stared at the code lines on his screen, so orderly, so obedient, and wondered why human lives couldn't be debugged as easily. A colleague, Jason, leaned over his desk. "Hey man, saw some thread online about Hayes and Barlow. Isn't that your wife's firm?" Evan froze. "Yeah." Jason nodded, tone casual but eyes sharp. "Crazy stuff. Hope she's doing okay." "She will be," Evan said. It wasn't anger exactly, but there was an iron note beneath the words that made Jason back off. Still, Evan knew how gossip worked. It didn't spread through malice, but through appetite. He opened Twitter during lunch and instantly regretted it. A new post, trending within their legal tech bubble, had power play. Associate turns whistleblower after affair with senior partner firm in crisis. The photo was grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Natalie entering the building under an umbrella. Beneath it, comments again, speculative, venomous, fascinated. He closed the app and stared at his reflection in the black screen. He didn't recognize the man looking back, a man both betrayed and protective of his betrayer. When he came home that evening, Natalie was sitting by the window, laptop open. Her inbox was a war zone, some emails from friends offering support, others laced with judgment disguised as sympathy. One subject line read, "You're brave, but was it worth it?" She clicked it open, read, and closed it again without responding. Evan poured himself water, then said quietly, "You don't have to fight everyone. Let the noise burn itself out." She nodded, eyes still on the screen. "It's not the noise that scares me. It's that people will stop talking before I get to speak for myself." He walked closer. "Then we speak together." She looked up. "You'd do that? Go public?" He hesitated. "If it helps you reclaim the story." Natalie considered this for a long moment, then shook her head. "No, not yet. I want to win the right to speak, not beg for it." He respected that. Silence between them now wasn't absence, it was armor. That weekend, they drafted a new version of themselves. They made lists on sticky notes stuck to the refrigerator, non-negotiables, shared joys, triggers, emergency exits. It was painfully corporate, but it worked. Evan wrote, "Honesty, even when it's ugly." Natalie wrote, "Boundaries, even when they hurt." That night, they cooked together for the first time in months. Pasta, too soft. Sauce, too salty. But the laughter that slipped out midway was real, the kind that comes not from comfort, but from exhaustion and surrender. After dinner, Natalie took off her ring. She didn't place it in a drawer, didn't return it. She set it on the table between them. "This isn't goodbye," she said. "It's just truth taking a breath." He nodded, looking at it, the small circle that had once meant permanence, now repurposed as evidence of growth. They didn't touch, didn't kiss. Instead, they sat across from each other like two witnesses signing an agreement that love, to survive, had to be rewritten. The city outside glowed in quiet complicity. Rain traced the glass again, but softer this time, as if the weather itself was learning mercy. And for the first night since the confession, they both slept apart, but not in exile. Just two people under the same roof, no longer pretending, waiting to see what honesty might rebuild once the storm was done with them. It was a Wednesday, when the first real test arrived. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but quiet. The kind that sneaks up disguised as routine. The morning light was thin, the city still half asleep. Natalie sat on the couch with her laptop, scrolling through unread emails, HR updates, legal bulletins, news cycles she no longer had to follow but couldn't look away from. Then it appeared. A single email, tucked between the mundane subject lines. Subject, Closure JH. Her pulse lurched. The initials, Julian Hayes. She stared at it for a full minute, fingers hovering over the trackpad. The rational voice in her head whispered, "Delete it." The other voice, the one that still remembered the shape of flattery, murmured, "Read it, just to see what story he's telling now." She clicked. "Natalie, I know HR told me to cease contact. I'll respect that after this message. But I need you to understand the truth before it's completely rewritten. You and I were not a mistake. What we had was real, even if it was flawed. I won't let the firm paint me as the predator in their PR narrative. You were brilliant, alive more than the gray world we both suffocated in. Don't let guilt erase what we actually shared. If you ever want to talk without lawyers, you know where to find me. J." Natalie closed the laptop. Her reflection in the dark screen looked foreign. Someone caught between temptation and self-preservation. For a few seconds, she almost drafted a reply. You don't get to define what was real. Then she stopped. Typing would make it alive again. She walked into the kitchen. Evan was pouring coffee, hair uncombed, wearing his old gray t-shirt with the faded logo of a startup that had failed years ago. The familiarity of him, his quiet presence, the warmth that still existed somewhere under the ruins pulled her back to ground. But guilt, like an ember, glowed beneath her ribs. She said nothing. At work, Evan felt the shift before she confessed it. Natalie's messages were shorter, her voice distant when he called at lunch. He told himself it was exhaustion, the fatigue of constant public scrutiny. Still, that night, when he found her on the balcony with her laptop closed, eyes red, he knew. "Who reached out?" he asked. She flinched, startled not by the question, but by how precise it was. "Julian," she admitted. "Just once. I didn't reply." He exhaled through his nose, turned away for a moment. "You should have told me." "I know," she said. "I thought if I ignored it, it would die quietly." Evan stared at the city lights reflected in the glass. "Secrets don't die quietly, Nat. They fester." "I wasn't keeping a secret. I was trying to protect us from more drama." "By handling it alone?" His tone wasn't angry, just tired, the kind of tired that's older than sleep. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. But in that moment, he realized apologies were like first aid. They stopped the bleeding, not the infection. He leaned against the railing. "You know what scares me most?" She looked at him, waiting. "That this," he gestured between them, "is going to become our entire language. Apologies, caution, debriefing after every emotional event. I don't want to spend my life as the moderator of our pain." Her voice broke slightly. "Then what do you want?" He turned to her. "I want a version of us that doesn't orbit around what you did or what I didn't do. I want a version that builds, not audits." The words hit harder than anger could. For a long while, the only sound was the hum of the city below. "I'll tell Dr. Wallace," she said finally. "About the email. I'll block him." "You should have done that weeks ago." "I wasn't ready," she whispered. "I thought blocking him meant I was ready to forgive myself. I'm still working on that." He nodded slowly. "Then start tonight." She opened her phone, found the thread, blocked the sender. She showed him the screen not as proof, but as closure. "Done," she said. 2 days later, Dr. Wallace listened to them without interrupting. Her gaze was even, measured, the kind of gaze that made silence feel both safe and unbearable. "This was a relapse," she said, "not of behavior, but of instinct. Natalie, you sought control by avoiding conflict. Evan, you sought peace by suppressing anger. Both are old habits. Both are comfort disguised as healing. Evan frowned. So what are we supposed to do? Keep reliving it until it stops hurting? Not relive, Dr. Wallace said. Relearn. Grief doesn't vanish, it gets domesticated. You learn its schedule, its triggers, its voice. You learn not to feed it after midnight. That made Natalie smile faintly. So we keep living with the ghost. Yes, the therapist said softly, until it stops haunting and starts teaching. They left the session quieter than usual. In the car, Natalie reached for the radio, turned it on to fill the silence. An old song came through Fleetwood Mac, Landslide. The lyrics hit like prophecy. Well, I've been afraid of changing, 'cause I built my life around you. Neither spoke. At a red light, Evan said, We should write new terms. Natalie turned to him. What do you mean? Not about staying or leaving, about living. No more rules taped to the fridge. Just one rule. She waited. Radical transparency, he said. Every fear, every slip, every impulse, no editing for comfort. If one of us wants to run, we say it out loud. That sounds brutal. It's the only way I'll believe this isn't another performance. She nodded, eyes glassy. Then let's try brutal honesty. It can't hurt worse than polite lies. That night, she moved her things from the couch back into the bedroom, not into the bed, but into the room. Her books, her folded sweaters, her presence. The air changed with her. Before sleeping, she said softly, I blocked him, but I still think about what he wrote. I hate that I do. Evan turned to face her in the dark. Thinking about it isn't a crime. Acting on it is. The mind keeps old rooms, Nat. We just stop living in them. She reached across the small space between them, her fingers grazing his wrist. Do you still love me? He didn't answer right away. I don't know if love is the word, but I still choose you. That somehow was harder and more honest than I love you. He switched off the lamp. The room fell into shadow. The city hummed beyond their window, constant, indifferent, alive. Inside, two people lay side by side, learning how to speak in the language of aftermath, where the heart doesn't forgive easily but still tries to listen. And for the first time, the silence between them wasn't made of fear. It was made of work. The first morning of spring arrived unnoticed. Seattle had the kind of light that made everything look like an old photograph washed, still forgiving. Evan woke before Natalie. He lay there, listening to the faint rhythm of her breathing, wondering when the act of waking up beside her had become something fragile, deliberate, a daily test of quiet courage. He slipped out of bed, padded to the kitchen, and started coffee. The smell filled the apartment warm, grounding, normal. Normal. A word that had changed shapes so many times it no longer felt neutral. When Natalie emerged, she was barefoot, hair damp from the shower, wearing a faded sweatshirt from her law school days. She looked younger, or maybe just less haunted. Morning, she said. Morning, he replied. It was small, that exchange, but it held something clean like two survivors agreeing not to lie about the weather. She sat at the table, wrapping her hands around her mug. The firm finalized it, she said. I'm officially on leave. They're offering me a settlement to resign quietly. Evan nodded. Are you going to take it? I think so, she said. It's not about the money. I just don't want my name in any more memos that start with, in light of recent events. She smiled faintly, then added, I applied for a teaching fellowship at the community college, ethics and practice. He looked at her, surprised. That's poetic. I know, she said, shrugging. Maybe that's why I want it. I don't want to run from what happened. I want to understand how people like me rationalize things they swore they'd never do.
Evan stirred his coffee. You think you'll get it? Maybe. Or maybe it's just an exercise in humility. He smiled at that, a small, genuine curve. Humility looks good on you. She tilted her head. And you look less like a man waiting for impact. Therapy helps, he said. And running, I started again. I noticed, she said, a trace of warmth in her voice. You stretch by the window at sunrise like some monastic ritual. He laughed softly. It's either that or doom scroll. They spent that afternoon sorting through old things. There was no ceremony to it, just drawers, boxes, and the quiet thud of decisions. A photo of them in Yosemite, sunburned and stupidly happy. A receipt from the diner where they'd argued about marriage and then laughed because they agreed on everything that didn't matter. They didn't talk about what to keep or throw away. They just moved through the remnants like archaeologists who'd stopped pretending to understand every artifact. At one point, Natalie paused, holding up the engagement ring she'd left on the table weeks ago. The metal caught the light and threw it onto the wall, a trembling reflection, like something alive. I don't know what to do with this, she said quietly. Evan looked at it, then at her. Maybe nothing, he said. Let it just be. She nodded, placed it back in its box, and slid it into the drawer, not buried, not displayed. That evening they walked along the waterfront. The air was cool, salted, threaded with the smell of fried fish from the pier. The city was alive again. Couples holding hands, teenagers laughing too loudly, a saxophonist busking under the overpass. For a while, they said nothing. The rhythm of their footsteps was enough. Then Natalie broke the silence. Do you ever think about starting over somewhere else? Another city? Sometimes, he said, but I'm not sure geography fixes what's internal. She smiled. You sound like Dr. Wallace. She's expensive. I might as well quote her. Natalie looked out at the water. I used to think endings were failures, she said, that if something ended, it meant it hadn't been strong enough to last. But maybe endings are just versions of truth we finally stop fighting. Evan nodded slowly. So what's our truth then? She turned toward him. That we broke something, and that maybe breaking it forced us to grow in directions we wouldn't have otherwise. He met her eyes, steady and unflinching. Do you still want to stay? I want to live honestly, she said. If that means staying, yes. But if one day it doesn't, I want us to have the decency to say so out loud. He took that in. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like maturity, an ending that had learned how to breathe. They stopped by the railing, the skyline flickering across the water. Natalie leaned forward, elbows on the cold metal, hair blown by the wind. You know what I realized? She said softly. Forgiveness isn't about restoring what was lost. It's about releasing the version of yourself that needed to be perfect. Evan exhaled. And what do we do with what's left? Live it, she said simply, without needing it to mean anything grand. Weeks later, Natalie packed her office. She took only a few books, left the framed degrees. When she walked out of Hayes and Barlow for the last time, she didn't look back. Outside, the sky was that tender shade of gray that promises both rain and renewal. Evan picked her up from the curb. He didn't ask how she felt. He didn't have to. On the drive home, they passed the building where they'd first met, an old law conference center now covered in ivy. Natalie smiled. You remember the panel we met at? You asked the moderator if integrity was still scalable. And you rolled your eyes at me, he said. I thought you were arrogant. I was. You still are, she said, laughing. It was the sound of people who had survived something not by erasing it, but by naming it. When they reached home, the rain began soft, patient, familiar. They didn't run inside. They stood under it, side by side, letting it soak them clean. Not as a symbol, not as redemption, just two human beings allowing weather to touch them without resistance. Natalie looked at him, the rain beating on her lashes. Do you think we'll make it? Evan smiled faintly. I think we already are. She took his hand, not a declaration, not a promise, just contact. And as they walked up the steps together, the city behind them shimmered with the kind of light that only comes after the storm, the kind that doesn't erase the wreckage, but makes it glisten.